laughed at for her size, until she won the war with her mind. Whispers Among Giants. The communications hub of the Galactic Coalition's flagship, Dauntless, was designed for beings twice Lyra Nix's height. Like everything else in the Coalition's sprawling interspecies alliance, the consoles, chairs, and doorways catered to the towering Altarians and muscular Krevlax who dominated the military hierarchy. At 3 feet tall, Lyra had grown accustomed to climbing onto platforms and stretching to reach controls, her slender fingers dancing across holographic interfaces while officers strode past, often not noticing her presence at all. "Nix, we need the supply route algorithms for the Cygnus sector," Commander Joris barked, his massive Krevlak frame blocking the light as he approached her station. "And try to be quick about it for once." Lyra nodded, her luminous violet eyes, the distinctive mark of all Minurians, briefly meeting his before returning to her work. "I've already compiled them, Commander. The optimal paths accounting for hegemony patrol patterns are highlighted in green." Joris grunted, swiping the data from her console. He didn't thank her. They never did. "Perhaps they'd notice you if you raised your voice occasionally," said Zephyr, her analytical interface companion, through the private channel in her ear implant. "My people don't raise their voices, Zeph," Lyra murmured. "Besides, it wouldn't make me any taller." The Minurians were known throughout the galaxy for 2 things: their diminutive stature and their extraordinary analytical minds. What most species failed to appreciate was that these traits were connected. Evolving on a world with scarce resources but abundant predators, Minurians had developed exceptional pattern recognition and predictive reasoning to survive. With bodies too small for combat, their minds had become their greatest weapons. Not that anyone in the Coalition seemed to care. To them, Lyra was just another support staff member, tucked away in the data division, processing intelligence reports and running simulations far from the real action. "Incoming transmission from command," announced the ship's AI. "All senior officers to the war room immediately." Lyra watched as commanders and captains hurried from the hub. General Telmer would be addressing them about the hegemony's latest advances. 3 more Coalition outposts had fallen in the past week, and rumors of a new offensive strategy by the enemy commander, Draken Voss, had everyone on edge. "You know," Zephyr's voice chirped in her ear, "your predictive model from last month showed this exact pattern of attacks." "And it's still sitting unread in General Telmer's inbox," Lyra replied, pulling up her analysis. She had mapped the psychological profile of Draken Voss based on his previous campaigns, identifying his preference for misdirection and false retreats. Her simulations had predicted the current hegemony movements with 92% accuracy. The door to the communications hub slid open, and Talon Riven strode in. The Coalition's most decorated pilot stood over 6 feet tall, his broad shoulders tense as he approached the main communication array. With sharp features and perpetually furrowed brows, Talon had a reputation for being as brilliant in the cockpit as he was difficult on the ground. "Is this station functional?" he asked, not looking directly at Lyra. "Yes, Captain Riven, what do you need?" His eyes finally found her, a flicker of surprise crossing his face as if he'd expected someone larger. "I need to review the sensor logs from the Vortex Nebula engagement. My squadron encountered anomalies in the hegemony fighters' maneuvers." "Of course." Lyra quickly accessed the data, her fingers moving with practiced precision. "I've analyzed those same logs. The hegemony pilots altered their standard formation at precisely 08:42 fleet time, shifting to a modified Tarsize formation that shouldn't have been possible given their ship's typical thrust capacity." Talon's expression shifted from dismissive to curious. "How did you catch that?" "It's my job to notice patterns," she said simply, projecting the tactical display. "Here, they transitioned from a standard defensive array to this configuration. The only way they could achieve this is if they've upgraded their propulsion systems," Talon finished, leaning closer to study the display. "That's why we lost the indomitable squadron. They couldn't anticipate the speed." Lyra nodded. "I submitted a report 3 days ago suggesting this possibility." "To whom?" "General Telmer's office." Talon's jaw tightened. "Well, it obviously didn't reach those of us who needed it." Before Lyra could respond, the ship lurched violently. The lights flickered, and the emergency sirens began to wail. "We're under attack," Zephyr announced in her ear. multiple hegemony warships decloaking directly off our port bow. The communications hub erupted into chaos as crew members scrambled to their battle stations. The main screen showed hegemony vessels appearing seemingly from nowhere, their weapons already firing. "Impossible," Talon muttered. "They couldn't have tracked us through the quantum fold." But Lyra was already pulling up navigation data. "They didn't track us," she said, her voice steady despite the ship shuddering around them. "They predicted us. Look at the pattern. They knew exactly where we would emerge." "How?" Talon demanded. "Because someone's been feeding them information," Lyra realized aloud, her mind racing ahead. Not intentionally, but her eyes widened as connections formed. "The new communication protocols. The hegemony's been decrypting our transmissions." Another blast rocked the ship, more violent than the first. The lights went out completely before emergency power engaged, bathing everything in a dim red glow. "This is General Telmer," came a strained voice over the ship-wide channel. "All command staff to emergency escape shuttles. The Dauntless has been compromised. Repeat, all command." The transmission cut off abruptly, replaced by the sound of distant explosions. "Zephyr ship status?" Lyra asked urgently. "Direct hit to the command deck," her AI companion reported. "Life signs, negative. General Telmer and the entire senior staff. They're gone, Lyra." The reality of the situation hit her like a physical blow. The entire coalition command structure had been on the Dauntless for the strategic summit, if they were truly gone. "Who's in command now?" Talon asked, his voice hollow. Before Lyra could answer, her secure console pinged. As the ship's systems recognized the loss of command staff, emergency protocols were activating. To her shock, her clearance level was being automatically elevated. "It's me," she whispered in disbelief. "What did you say?" Talon asked, stepping closer. Lyra stared at her console. "The contingency protocols. With the command staff gone, systems are looking for the highest-ranking officer with strategic clearance still alive." She looked up at Talon, her violet eyes wide. "I'm the only senior analyst left with access to the command codes and strategic protocols." Talon shook his head. "That's impossible. You're just a Minurian data analyst," she finished. "But I'm also the one who designed the Coalition's current threat assessment system. My security clearance is Alpha 9 for accessing command decisions." Another explosion rocked the ship, and warning lights flashed across her console. "We've lost engine control," Zephyr reported. "Hull breaches on decks 7 through 12. Evacuation protocols initiated." Talon grabbed her arm. "We need to get to the escape pods." But Lyra was frozen, her mind racing through possibilities and outcomes. In seconds, she had calculated their odds, mapped potential scenarios, and reached a conclusion. "Captain Riven," she said, her voice suddenly firm, "I need you to trust me." Something in her tone made him pause. "Why?" "Because I know how to save what's left of the Coalition," she replied, her fingers already flying across her console. "But I need your help to do it." For a moment, Talon studied her, this tiny being with fierce determination in her eyes. Then he nodded. "Tell me what you need." As the Dauntless began to break apart around them, Lyra Nix made her first tactical decision as the Coalition's de facto commander. It wouldn't be her last. The unveiled mind. 6 weeks after the devastating attack on the Dauntless, the Galactic Coalition had transformed from a retreating, demoralized force into a mysterious enigma that confounded the hegemony at every turn. Supply ships appeared where they shouldn't be possible. Defensive outposts anticipated attacks before they occurred. Small squadrons of fighters managed to disable hegemony dreadnoughts through tactics that seemed to predict enemy movements with uncanny precision. And no one knew who was behind it. In the dimly lit command center of the Coalition's hidden base on Artemis IV, Lyra Nix stood on her elevated platform, surrounded by holographic displays showing fleet movements across 12 sectors. The room buzzed with activity as officers implemented her strategies, many still unaware that the brilliant tactical decisions came from the small figure they barely noticed. "The hegemony has withdrawn from the Epsilon cluster," reported Commander Varden, a stocky Terran who had become one of Lyra's few confidants. "They lost 3 capital ships and gained nothing. That's the 4th failed offensive this month." Lyra nodded, her violet eyes reflecting the glow of the tactical displays. "They're adapting, though, Draken Voss is no fool. He senses a pattern in our responses. Let him sense whatever he wants, said Talon Riven, entering the command center with his flight suit still on, fresh from leading a successful raid on a hegemony fuel depot. We're winning. Over the past weeks, Talon had become Lyra's most unexpected ally. After escaping the Dauntless together, he had witnessed firsthand her extraordinary ability to process information and predict outcomes. While others questioned taking orders relayed through Commander Varden, supposedly from Central Command, Talon knew the truth. Barely winning, Lyra corrected him, manipulating the holographic display to show resource projections. The hegemony still outnumbers us 3-1. If Draken identifies our strategy, he could overwhelm us through sheer force. Then change the strategy, Talon suggested, moving closer to her platform until their eyes were nearly level. You've been inside his head for weeks. He expects us to be reactive. Let's surprise him. Lyra felt an unwelcome warmth rising in her cheeks. Among her people, such direct eye contact was intimate, a sharing of minds. Talon couldn't know this, of course, but the intensity of his gaze still unsettled her. I've been considering something, she said, turning back to the display. The Nexus Station. Commander Varden nearly choked. Nexus, that's the hegemony's primary communications hub. It's impregnable. Nothing is impregnable, Lyra said quietly, especially when your enemy thinks exactly that. She expanded the display, showing the massive space station that served as the nerve center for all hegemony communications. Their entire command structure relies on quantum-encrypted transmissions routed through Nexus. If we could disrupt it, even temporarily. Every hegemony fleet would be isolated and operating blind, Talon finished, the ghost of a smile forming on his lips. It's brilliant and suicidal. Not necessarily. Lyra's fingers danced through the holographic simulation. I've identified a vulnerability in their defense grid, a maintenance cycle that occurs every 42 days. The next one is in 3 days. Varden studied the data with growing amazement. How long have you been planning this? Since the Dauntless fell, Lyra admitted, but executing it requires precise timing and, she hesitated, a direct negotiation with Draken Voss himself. The silence that followed was deafening. Negotiation, Talon finally managed. What could we possibly negotiate with that butcher? A prisoner exchange, Lyra explained. We captured his nephew during the Battle of Ceres. Intelligence suggests Draken values family above all else, a psychological lever we can use. To what end? Varden asked. To distract him, Lyra said. The exchange would happen simultaneously with our operation at Nexus. While all eyes are on the high-profile diplomatic event, our real mission proceeds undetected. Talon stared at her with a mixture of admiration and concern. And who's going to lead this fake negotiation? Varden. He's the only one who supposedly has contact with Central Command. Lyra took a deep breath. No, I am. Absolutely not, Talon said immediately, his protective instinct surprising even himself. Once Draken sees you, he'll know there's no Central Command. He'll realize the coalition has been led by a Minurian half his size, Lyra finished, a rare edge entering her voice. Yes, he will, and that moment of shock, that instant where his arrogance makes him underestimate me, that's exactly when our forces will strike Nexus. Commander Varden rubbed his chin thoughtfully. It's risky, but if it works. If it works, we break the back of the hegemony's communication system, Lyra said. But I need both of you to help convince the others to follow this plan. 3 days later, aboard the coalition diplomatic vessel Concord, Lyra adjusted the formal attire that had been hastily modified to fit her small frame. In the mirror, she barely recognized herself. Gone was the overlooked analyst, replaced by someone who looked surprisingly like a commander. The hegemony flagship is approaching, Zephyr announced in her ear. Draken Voss has agreed to the terms of the meeting. His vessel will dock in 15 minutes. Lyra nodded, reviewing the plan one last time in her mind. Across the galaxy, 5 coalition strike teams were in position near Nexus Station, waiting for the precise moment when the defensive grid would begin its maintenance cycle. Meanwhile, she would face the most feared military commander in the hegemony, a being known for his tactical brilliance and ruthless efficiency. You don't have to do this, Talon said from the doorway, his normally stern expression softened with concern. Yes, I do, Lyra replied. Our entire strategy depends on timing and distraction. Talon moved closer, kneeling to meet her eye level, a gesture that made Lyra's heart skip. No one had ever made such an effort to treat her as an equal. The Coalition wouldn't be standing without you, he said quietly. If Draken realizes that, he'll either respect me or underestimate me, Lyra replied. Either works to our advantage. Talon shook his head. Just promise me you'll be careful. I've gotten used to having you around, Nyx. A hint of a smile crossed his face. Even if I have to look down to find you. Before she could respond, the ship's alert system activated. Hegemony vessel has docked, diplomatic party approaching. The moment had arrived. Lyra squared her shoulders and made her way to the conference room, Talon following as her security escort. The plan called for a galaxy-wide broadcast of the negotiations, another element designed to focus all attention away from Nexus. The doors slid open to reveal Commander Draken Voss. Standing over 7 feet tall, the hegemony leader towered over everyone in the room, his scaled skin gleaming under the lights, eyes like polished obsidian scanning for threats. When those eyes fell on Lyra, they narrowed in confusion. "Where is the Coalition commander?" he demanded, his voice a rumbling bass that seemed to vibrate the air. Lyra stepped forward. "I am Lyra Nyx, acting strategic commander of the Galactic Coalition. I speak with full authority in these negotiations." For a moment, Draken simply stared. Then, to everyone's surprise, he laughed, a sound like grinding stones. "This is your secret weapon, a Minurian barely tall enough to reach a control panel." His eyes moved to Talon. "Is this some kind of joke, Captain Riven?" "I assure you, Commander Voss," Lyra said calmly, "my size has no bearing on my authority or capability." Draken leaned down, bringing his massive face closer to hers. "Do you know what we call Minurians in the hegemony? Calculator mice, useful for processing numbers, nothing more." "And yet," Lyra replied, "these calculator mice have managed to destroy 37 of your capital ships in the past 6 weeks. Curious, isn't it?" The broadcast cameras captured every moment as Draken's expression shifted from amusement to suspicion. You're the one who's been coordinating the Coalition's strategies." "Shall we discuss the prisoner exchange?" Lyra asked, ignoring his question as she moved to the conference table. "Or would you prefer to continue expressing your surprise that you've been consistently outmaneuvered by someone you consider inconsequential?" The room fell silent as Draken processed this information, his tactical mind reassessing months of defeats in a new light. "Begin broadcast," Lyra instructed, and throughout the galaxy, beings of all species watched as the diminutive Minurian faced down the fearsome hegemony commander. "Let's talk about your nephew, Commander," Lyra said, activating the holographic display showing the prisoner, "and about how predictable your responses become when family is involved." Draken's eyes widened fractionally, enough to confirm Lyra's psychological profile of him. "What are you implying?" "That your attachment to your bloodline has created a pattern I could exploit," Lyra explained. "Just as your preference for the Kaldarian offensive in Sector 9 revealed your blind spot to flanking maneuvers, or how your insistence on quantum relay communications through a single hub demonstrates your prioritization of control over redundancy." With each word, Draken's expression darkened. Across the table, he no longer saw a tiny, insignificant being, but a mind that had been dissecting his tactics and anticipating his every move. "She's doing it," Zephyr whispered in Lyra's ear. "Nexus Station's defenses are cycling down for maintenance. Our teams are proceeding." "You think you know me?" Draken growled. "You know nothing of the hegemony's true power." "I know enough," Lyra countered. "I know that in approximately 40 seconds, your communications with your fleet will be interrupted. I know that without those communications, your distributed forces will fall into disarray. And I know that you're only now realizing that this entire negotiation was merely a diversion." Draken's hand moved to his communication device just as it emitted a harsh static sound. His eyes widened in genuine shock. "What have you done?" he demanded. "Change the game," Lyra replied simply. The room erupted into chaos as Draken's guards moved to protect him, and Coalition security responded. But above the confusion, the broadcast continued, transmitting to every corner of the galaxy the image of the small Minurian standing unflinching before the hegemony commander. "Nexus is ours," came Commander Varden's voice through the secure channel. "All hegemony communications disrupted. Their fleets are blind and isolated." Lyra allowed herself a moment of satisfaction before addressing Draken again. "You have a choice now, Commander. Continue this war without your communication infrastructure or begin discussion of terms for a ceasefire." "You expect me to surrender to you?" Draken snarled. "I expect you to recognize the strategic reality," Lyra corrected. "Your psychological profile suggests you value survival above pride. Prove me right." For several tense moments, the outcome hung in the balance. Then, slowly, Draken Voss, the most feared commander in the galaxy, inclined his head in the barest acknowledgement of defeat. "Perhaps," he said quietly, "the hegemony has underestimated the Minurians." 3 months later, in the grand hall of the newly established Galactic Conquered headquarters, beings from across the known universe gathered to celebrate the formal peace treaty. At the center of it all stood Lyra Nix, no longer hidden in the shadows, but recognized throughout the galaxy as the strategist who had outthought the hegemony. "Commander Nix," called out a Centaurian diplomat, "will you be leading the new Conquered Defense Initiative?" Before she could answer, Talon appeared at her side. "She'd better be," he said with a rare smile. "Who else could keep all these species from starting another war?" As the crowd laughed, Talon bent down to whisper in her ear. "They still don't fully understand, do they? How you see patterns they can't even perceive." Lyra looked up at him, noticing how naturally he now adjusted to her height. "Perhaps they don't need to understand, they just need to listen." "I've been listening," Talon said, his voice softening. "And I've been wondering what patterns you see for us now that the fighting is over." Lyra felt that familiar warmth in her cheeks again, but this time she didn't look away. "I see interesting possibilities, Captain Riven, variables I hadn't previously considered." Talon's smile widened. "I've always enjoyed defying predictions." As they stood together amid the celebration, Lyra realized that throughout the galaxy, children of all species would now grow up hearing stories of how a Minurian strategist had saved the Coalition, not with weapons or physical might, but with the power of her mind. Perhaps, in time, no being would be judged by their size, but by the scale of their thoughts. And as Talon's hand found hers, just for a moment, Lyra Nix, the strategist who had changed the course of history, allowed herself to think not of the past or future, but simply of the present. "Retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses."